What separates successful entrepreneurs today isn't different skill sets, but different mindsets. As the cost of building and launching products is at an all-time low, competition for customers is at an all-time high. This fundamentally changes how successful products are built. So in this video, I'm going to share some practical strategies and tactics for building the next generation of products that matter. Hi there, if you're new to this channel, my name is Ash Maurya. I'm an entrepreneur and author and the creator of the one-page business modeling tool, Lean Canvas. Over the last 10 years, I've had the privilege and opportunity to travel the world and work with thousands of entrepreneurs. In my travels, I realized quickly that the persona of the entrepreneur had changed. It's no longer two guys in a garage in Silicon Valley, but entrepreneurs are everywhere, and they transcend age, gender, and geography. While we may look different and speak different languages, we all want the same things, fear the same things, and even make the same mistakes. After a while, I started seeing all founders fall into one of two personas. I named them Steve and Larry. Both Steve and Larry studied at similar universities and worked similar jobs where they quickly grew into key roles. After a few years, they both got hit with an idea for a startup and decided to quit their jobs and venture out on their own. Even though I've given these characters names to make them more familiar, I want to emphasize that what makes them similar isn't their age, gender, or geography, but they both were struck by a big idea and decided to act on it. They were aspiring founders. What differentiates them, though, is how they look just a year later. A year later, Steve is still building his product. He has no product revenue and relies on part-time freelancing work to fund his product development. And he works alone. On the other hand, Larry has a growing customer base, growing revenue, and a growing team. How did they end up in such different places? To answer that question, let's travel back in time. A year ago, Steve is at his desk, lost in thought. Earlier that day, his manager had told him that their parent company, following on from a recent acquisition, would be shutting down their offices in a couple of months. And Steve was given the choice to relocate to headquarters or take a severance package. Steve reads this as a sign. He had always planned on starting his own company when the timing was right, and even though his startup had had a few bad product starts, they eventually managed to get acquired, and he had really felt proud to be part of the core team. He decides to take the evening to think things over. He estimates that if he keeps his expenses in check, the severance package and his savings will provide him with a year of runway to get something off the ground. He does have this one idea that he's been noodling around in his head for a few months already. The next day, he decides to take the plunge and accepts the severance package. And it's off to the races. Steve wastes no time getting to work. He anticipates that if he stays focused and works full-time without distractions, he should be able to launch the first version of his product in 3 months. He wants to go about doing things the right way, so he begins designing and building his product like a craftsman. But little things start taking longer than expected, and the delays quickly add up. Weeks quickly turn into months. It's now 6 months later, and Steve is getting a little nervous. The product isn't up to his standards, and his revised estimates put the launch date out at least another 3 months or maybe even 6. He'll be out of money by then, and he decides he needs help. So he hits up some of his close friends and tries to recruit them, offering them generous equity in exchange. But they don't see what he sees and find it hard to justify leaving their secure, well-paying jobs. Steve attributes this setback to a lack of vision on his friend's part, but he's even more determined than ever to find a way to finish his product. He decides to hit the pitching circuit next and raise funds. He starts by contacting his previous startup's founder, Susan, who readily agrees to meet with him. Susan likes Steve's idea, offers to introduce him to several investors, but advises him to put together a bulletproof business plan first. Steve has never written a business plan before, so he downloads a few templates and picks one that he likes. As he starts writing, he finds that he doesn't know the answers to many of the questions being asked, but he does his best to complete the plan anyway. He's especially encouraged by the financial forecast spreadsheet. The more he plays with the numbers, the more he's convinced that he's onto something really big. He even tweaks a few numbers downward to downplay the fantastic model he has created because it's so good that he thinks people might not believe them. He knows a lot is at stake, so he spends several more days developing his elevator pitch, outlining his product roadmap, and polishing his 10-page slide deck. He reaches out to Susan a week later, who helps him set up half a dozen meetings with investors. He doesn't get an instant yes, but at least he doesn't get an outright rejection either. He debriefs Susan later, who reluctantly bursts his bubble and tells him that feedback like, "You're too early for us," and "Let's touch base in 6 months" are all code for "We're not interested but too polite to say no." Steve is in a classic catch-22. He can't make people see his vision until he completes his product, but investors won't give him the resources to complete his product, so what is he to do? Steve still believes in his product and is determined to build it. He retreats back into his metaphorical garage and decides to self-fund his idea with part-time freelancing. Progress is slow, but at least he's still working on his product nights and weekends, moving his idea forward one step at a time. Now let's turn to Larry. He too was hit by an awesome idea a year ago, but unlike Steve, he doesn't start with a build-first or investor-first approach. Larry recognizes that those approaches used to work at a time when building products was hard and expensive, but the world has changed. Investors used to value intellectual property and funded teams that demonstrated that they could build stuff, but this is no longer the case. Investors today value traction above everything else. Traction isn't about being first to market, but first to market adoption. Traction is evidence that people other than yourself, your team, and your mom care about your idea. More importantly, traction is evidence of a working business model. This leads to an epiphany for Larry, where he realizes that a working business model, not just a working solution, is the true product of an entrepreneur. Instead of writing a business plan, Larry spends half an afternoon sketching out a one-page business model for his idea using a lean canvas template that was recommended to him by one of his trusted mentors. He then tests the viability of his business model using a quick back-of-the-envelope calculation, and from there builds out a traction roadmap and validation strategy. A key difference between Larry's validation strategy from Steve's is that he prioritizes testing what's riskiest versus what's easiest in his business model. Larry correctly recognizes that in the new world, what's riskiest for most products has shifted from technical risks to customer and market risks. The challenge today isn't can we build it, but rather should we build it? This is why he decides to take a traction-first approach. But how do you demonstrate traction without first building a product? Aren't we back to the classic catch-22? Well, not really, because contrary to popular belief, you don't need a working product to uncover problems worth solving or even to land a first batch of paying customers. Unlike Steve, who is still perfecting and polishing his product a year later, Larry manages to define his minimum viable product, or MVP, through carefully scripted customer interviews in less than 8 weeks. He avoids spending needless time, money, and effort building a product he hopes customers will buy, and instead defines and builds an MVP he knows customers will buy. This puts Larry's idea on solid footing, and he spends the next 4 weeks building out the first version of his solution. And once that's ready, he immediately starts charging his customers from day one, who are happy to pay because his MVP nails their must-have problems and delivers value right out of the gate. Larry continues to refine his product from there through many more customer conversations and product iterations. This allows him to continuously outlearn his competition and always stay a step ahead of them. By the end of the year, Larry's customer base is growing, his revenue is growing, and so is his team. His business model is on the right track to achieve product market fit. The difference between Steve and Larry isn't differing skill sets, but differing mindsets. Steve is operating like an artist and is primarily driven by his love for his product or solution. You can easily substitute artist here with software developer, designer, creative, maker, writer, author, hacker, inventor, and so on. He takes a build-first approach, which in today's world is highly risky. Larry, on the other hand, is operating like an innovator. Innovators turn inventions into working business models. He recognizes that we are living in a new world where the rules have changed. Many founders start off looking like Steve. That was definitely my story. At some point, I had a triggering event where I too realized that how we build products was no longer the same, and succeeding in a new world required new mindsets. In this video, I shared the first 3 starting mindsets from the Continuous Innovation Framework: viewing the business model as a product, taking a traction-first approach, and starting with customer problems before solutions. I have 7 more mindsets that go into the process of launching and growing a successful product. If you'd like to go deeper, I've linked a free Continuous Innovation Foundations course in the description below. Thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.